Hey everybody, welcome back to the Badgerland Birding Podcast, bringing you birding news and stories from the Badger State and beyond. Today, we're with Gull expert Amar Ayyash, and he's here to tell us all about gulls as well as his new book he has coming out. So how's it going, Amar?
It's going great. Very busy, very exciting time of the year. Gull season is picking up. We have migrants coming south, and it's been pretty exciting here the last week or so.
And you guys had a pretty cool find just recently. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the inaugural Urban Birding Festival took place this past weekend, and we were out on a lake on a pelagic, and we stumbled on some Sabin's gulls. So Sabin's gull, typically, if we see them in Illinois, we'll see one or perhaps two at a time. But we happened on a flock of seven and a singleton bird about an hour before that. So we had a total of eight for the day, which is apparently a new state record,
Wow,
new high count. And so we were excited about that.
that is cool.
How far offshore were you guys?
So the first bird we saw, the singleton, we saw about 4 miles out, and then the seven we saw about 13, 14 miles out.
Okay.
So do you think for this time of the year that is actually pretty normal to see them and just not many people are getting that far out on the water who are birders, or do you think you just stumbled upon a pretty good day for them?
Yeah, so the people I've been talking to, that's an idea now. Are they just going out offshore and we don't see them in those numbers, or was this just really an exceptional sighting? I don't think we have enough data points, but we will soon because there's a gentleman out of Michigan, Donald Estep. Are you familiar with the name?
Mm-mm.
So he's going to begin an organized effort to do pelagics out of Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan soon. So I was just talking to him this morning. He wants to get out there and like do organized, consistent trips and try to get some data points from the fall season.
So every Lake Michigan State but ours.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are a little bit too north for him, but
Oof.
we could probably twist his arm and see what he says.
That'd be pretty cool. I'd be
I
down to
mean,
do
we've got
that.
Superior and Michigan here, so
I,
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say we have superior skills up here or
we
something
have
like that.
superior skills up
Oh,
here,
we have the
not
superior
necessarily.
skills. Yeah,
Well,
we have.
I think whatever state you're in probably has the superior golf skills.
It
But it
was just right place at the right time. The Savins gulls are surprisingly small, and I think everybody on the trip was surprised by how fast, how agile they are. And at first glance, you think you're looking at sternaterns. They're just so fast and so their wings are so pointy, and compared to the herrings and ringbills, you're taken by surprise when you see them in a flock on Lake Michigan.
yeah. I just looked it up. It's about 118 miles across from Illinois to Michigan, like to that side at like the middle of it.
Mhm.
So, do you think if you went to like the middle of the lake, there would be more? Do you get to like a dead zone? Is there a peak spot?
I honestly don't think anyone knows. We've been out from Berrien County, Michigan. We've been out from Chicago a couple times. And I don't think anybody's ever made it beyond like 15, 18 miles, I want to say. So it's all like new territory for anybody who gets that far out into the lake.
Could
Uh,
just be like a flock of ivory gulls out there.
there could be, or
I
like
bet
Nobody
there's a
knows
lot
about.
of sea ducks. I bet you could hit some big rafts of long-tailed ducks and scoters out there.
say long-tailed ducks apparently are out there by the thousands.
Yeah, I told you I was right. I
Yeah, no,
was.
no, that's a true story. Like the long-tailed ducks are out in the middle of the lake in the middle of the winter, flocks of 5, 6,000.
Yeah, what we need is somebody who just has a houseboat that's willing to just spend some time right in the center
Oh
of
yeah,
the lake and just do bird counts for, a month.
that
Just
would be popular.
stock up on the food, report back weekly. That's what we need.
I'm down.
That would
Was
be
that a
pretty cool.
volunteered? Are you volunteering?
Like, yeah, let's do it.
There it is. Um, And I think that we should talk about the fact that you're the gull guy, Amar, because I think everybody that I've ever met who has questions about gulls knows about you, and you've acquired that reputation of being incredibly knowledgeable. Where did this all start for you? How, first of all,
Uh,
how did you get into birding, and how did you get into the specifics of gulls?
yeah, so I got into gulls before birding, so I've never been like a complete birder, like a lot of my friends are. So as a undergrad, as a freshman, it all really began feeding gulls in a parking lot at school.
That
And
explains a lot.
yeah, I was intrigued by their boldness and just the ability to see them so easily. I didn't know what they were, like what species they were. I knew they were seagulls. Um,
He said
but
the
yeah,
word.
so I got into them and wanted to see more variety, let's say, and I started to kind of go different places to look for them, beachfronts, parks, rivers, dams, and I would run into birders. Like I kept running into people with scopes, binoculars, and I finally figured out they're looking at birds. And so I started talking to folks, and that's how I got into birding. So once I met enough birders, I finally got involved with some CBCs, and I dabbled with listing for a little bit for about 2 years, probably under 2 years, and then got right back into gulls.
It's interesting that you say I was out looking and I ran into birders. Like you weren't birding, it was just a thing you were interested in, the gulls themselves.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't know. I never had any encounters with people who kept lists. I didn't like growing up, I didn't know anybody who went out to look at birds. I didn't even know it was a thing. Like I remember watching movies when I was a kid where, a little old lady had her binoculars. She was a bird watcher. I didn't think there were actually bird clubs and organizations dedicated and books dedicated to birding.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Because we didn't really know until, we watched the movie The Big Year and we were like, oh, people do this. You kind of have to get introduced to kind of the idea that birding exists at some point beyond kind of the backyard birder type stuff. You did say the word seagulls once, and there
Yeah.
are some crazy fanatic people out there will say there's no such thing as a seagull. It's
Why don't we
just
call them
gulls.
purists?
It's just
Purists.
gulls. Can we give people a pass if they say seagull, or is it totally incorrect? Should we be correcting random people on the street? How serious should we be with this?
So from my own experience, having known them as seagulls when I was watching them before I was a birder, I think it's an understood word. I think it's an accepted word in the English language. And I think a lot of birders complicate it. Um, there's really nothing wrong with using it as a loose word to refer to that group of birds. Now, preferably you'd say gulls if you knew about their natural history and that some of them never make it to the sea. Um, but I think some birders are just too hard on beginners. I've seen it in walks and stuff. People call someone out and like belittle them, berate them for using the word, and I'm like, it's not that serious. Um, it's understood. Like, there's no confusion what you're talking about. You're talking about the gulls. So yeah, they get a pass. They get a pass.
That's
That's
good to
good.
know. We can
Yeah.
finally put that question to rest. So, how did you go from kind of dabbling in the gulls to when you started to become an authority on them? Was there a transition where you suddenly realized I have all this knowledge now on how to identify? How did you start that process of just digging in because it is a grouping of birds that gives a lot of people identification problems.
Yeah, so like it all started as just chasing rare things like Rosses and ivory and crossing state lines and chasing a gray-hooded gull in New York. And but I don't remember like a specific time where I said I'm more knowledgeable in gulls than most other people. Like I don't know where that happened, but there were so many trips out west to Alaska, different countries to see gulls. I think, if there was a defining moment for me, it was probably around 2015, 2016, where I started to think I have to either get serious about putting this on a website or write a book. So right around that time, 2016, I decided I'm going to do something. I have to publish something and share some of this with people. But I don't know if there was ever an official time where I became Gull expert. I'm kind of tickled by the title when people call me a Gull expert, because I don't know that I am.
To us, you are.
Yeah,
I know
because I
I
feel
know a
like
lot about gulls, and probably more than most people, but I don't know what makes someone a gull expert.
you become that person whenever there's a question about it, it's like, oh, ask Amar about it. Or like he would know about this, or he has a blog about gulls, or he runs the Facebook page about gulls.
All
Well,
those things you just listed all apply.
it all helped. It definitely added to it. In 2012, I began the North American Gulls group. So what is that now? We're going on 14 years, 13 years. Um, and that has helped tremendously to see every weird gull that comes across people's binoculars posted on the group. It's given me a lot of practice without even being in the field, just looking at weird birds all day, every day.
You have any
Yeah,
gull merch that you sell?
I don't, but that's a great idea, by the way.
it seems like a missed opportunity there.
We can collaborate on that after we're
That's
done with the
true. Yeah.
podcast today. We'll
Yeah,
talk about it.
yeah.
I see the wheels
I know,
turning.
I know. I see him getting excited about this
But
idea.
Yeah. What else?
talking about that, this is all kind of culminated in your book, The Gull Guide, that I believe is coming out in October, right?
Yeah, October 29th. It's on pre-order right now. I actually just received my author's copy 2 days
Ooh, look at
ago.
that.
It is kind of blurry. I see that there, but 528 pages of gull lore. 36 species are covered in the book. 7 hybrids are fully covered in the book. Um, I'm very proud of it. Very proud of it.
That's fantastic. How long did it take you to put all that together?
A little under 6 years, 5.5 years.
It's a long time coming. And I think it'll be useful for a lot of people that want to get into gulls more because, you kind of get the basic knowledge from a lot of field guides. It'll be cool to see a really, really deep dive into a lot of these species, which I want to talk about a lot. First, before we get into that, do you get excited whenever somebody talks gulls with you?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's it. I mean, they're my favorite.
If you
I
can't
did an
see right
interview.
now because you're listening and not watching, he just leaned forward in his chair. He is intrigued.
Oh yeah, I'm shifting now. I did an interview with a guy from Illinois Audubon this afternoon over the phone, and as soon as we got into gulls, because it was about just birding in general and pelagics in general, but when we got into gulls, it was just a whole different vibe for me. They're my favorite.
Whole different ball game. And I right now I want to get into gulls. So I've got a few questions. I think Derek has a few questions. Derek, do you have a first leading gull question you'd like to have answered?
Yeah, well, out of all your experiences with chasing rare gulls, what's your favorite one been that you've seen?
Oh yeah. Um,
If you want, you can give like a top three.
yeah, all right, let's go with Ross's Gull in Colorado, Cherry Creek Reservoir. It's like a 14-hour drive for us overnight. And we watched the bird for probably a total of 5 minutes.
Oh, dang.
Yeah,
This is
long.
one of your top encounters?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was the one that respotted it the next morning. And so we were all lined up and we have our scopes and we're looking out at these ring-billed gulls and California gulls. And I see this little white speck bobbing around, and there it is. So that was fun. Ross's Gull, that was my life for Ross's. Um, Number 2 would probably be an ivory gull in Cape May. I
Ooh.
think I want to say 2009, maybe. That was a fun trip, long trip, negative reports all morning. We get there, and within like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, being seen at this such and such dock, and we run there in the rain like little kids. And fun stuff, just to cross state lines to go see this Arctic ghost. And my third would probably be gray hooded gull in New York, Coney Island, middle summer, sweltering heat. We have people like naked on the beach, and
Coney Island.
Coney Island, we got laughing gulls, and we had to find a gray hooded gull, and there it was. Lifer, second ABA record. Yeah,
Did you celebrate with a Coney Island hot dog after?
I did. Nathan's famous.
Boom, there it is. That's
Did you
the
share it with the gray
experience.
hooded gull?
I actually, it got some fries, but it didn't get any of the hot dog.
Fantastic.
I'm kind of
Um,
surprised the gray gull was not on that top list.
That's a fun one. But you said narrow to the top three, so I left gray gull out of there. So if I get a fourth, that one's up there. Swallow-tailed gull outside of Seattle is up there. That was a
That's
fun
an incredible
case.
looking bird. That's one
Yeah.
on my list I need to see.
So we got it in Everett, northernmost sighting of the species anywhere in the world. That was a fun chase. That was like a whole day chase, and it came down to the last hour of sunlight.
nice. That's a
Is there
last
a
minute
North
lifer.
American gull? Yeah, that is a last minute lifer. Is there a North American gull you haven't seen yet?
Um, no, got them all. Got them all. Kelp, um, red-legged kittiwake. Got them all.
Which North American gull species is your absolute favorite?
I keep going back to Franklin's. As
Oh,
boring as that sounds, Franklin's is a cool species. I think it's underrated. There's a lot to learn about Franklin's. Unfortunately, not a lot of banding data, and that's a missed opportunity with Franklin's being a trans-equatorial migrant. Um, they have these neat molts where they go through two complete molts. Um, you know, radically different habitats in the breeding versus non-breeding season, and just to see them migrate in mass. I've seen them in Peru. We had a flock of probably 60,000 of them. And then to see just a few of them on the Great Lakes is pretty neat.
yeah. I had to do some research with Franklin's gulls because I made a Franklin's gull versus laughing gull ID tips video and I learned a lot about them. I think it's very interesting that the laughing gull is more coastal and then during migration and then breeding, the Franklin's gulls pretty much go right through the center of the country over the plains in places where you just wouldn't really think of gulls as living so much.
Yeah, yeah. When I first started getting serious about gulls, I made a trip to Red Rock in Iowa. Are you guys familiar with it?
No, not
Not
really.
really.
It's one of their inland reservoirs. It's pretty big. They have a nice dam there. Good gull list. They've had Rosses, Kittiwake, Sabins. Um, and that's probably the closest place to us, Wisconsin and Illinois, where you could see 10, 15,000 of them in the fall.
That's wild.
Yeah, yeah. That's pretty unusual that far east. But next month is like prime time to see big flocks of Franklins in
Ooh,
Iowa.
Derek,
That may warrant a trip.
we might have to go there.
Yeah, not too far, not too far. It's
How
probably gonna
far away did you say? How many hours?
for me from Chicago, it's about 4.5 hours.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
No.
No, it's not.
Sounds like a wild spectacle. On the topic of Franklin's gulls and actually other gull species as well, but Franklin's are ones that are known a lot for the pink wash on the underside.
Yeah.
What causes that pink wash and what other gull species exhibit that coloration as well?
Yeah, so the cause is diet. So birds have to ingest carotenoids, usually from plants or from invertebrate.
Flamingo is a
Plankton,
classic example.
flamingos being a classic example. So it's more common for whatever reason in the smaller gulls, um, Ross's gull and Franklin's gull being the two most common. But there's probably, I think, 17, 18 different gull species that have shown this pink. Um, it's more common in the smaller gulls, Bonapartes and such. Um, Terns can show it.
Hmm.
but mainly the smaller gulls if we're talking about gulls. Ring-billed gull is probably the most common large gull,
Hmm.
show pink.
Is that simply because they have less body mass, so any coloration ingested is going to show more on a smaller bird with less mass?
So ring-bills are known to feed in crabapple trees,
Oh.
Hmm.
and the ones that we find with that pink suffusion are usually ones from like Lake Ontario, Buffalo region, and that's mainly where they're feeding on crabapple trees in that region.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think you have a post about that, or a couple posts about these birds being pink, right?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
pretty sure I
So
learned about it first from your website.
yeah, another weird variable in all of this is on Lake Michigan and some of the other Great Lakes, there are other pink ringbills, but it's an external colorant.
Hmm.
Hmm.
They look a little matted and messy. It's not the same pink we see on Ross's and Franklin's. These are birds resting on iron ore piles.
Oh,
Oh.
Yeah, especially around Gary, Indiana, East
mm.
Chicago, Indiana. Woody Gauss did a nice post on this recently, about 2 months ago, and he does a Google Earth image where he shows these large mountains of iron ore piles, and the gulls will rest on there and even nest on there.
Hmm.
Once that color gets on them, usually starting around May, June, it gets really bad around August, September. This time of year, you can find a lot of them. That color won't leave until they molt those feathers because it's like a permanent stain.
Wow.
Yeah,
That
I know.
rem that reminds me of that one kind of viral post that was going around where it was like rare yellowish looking gull turned out to be seagull covered in curry or something
Yeah,
like that. You know what I'm
that
talking
kind of
about?
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the most
once,
goal post ever.
yeah, once that color's on them, whether it be oil or iron ore or curry, they have to molt those feathers to get rid of that.
Do you think that helps them attract a mate, or do you think it deters mating?
With the ones on Lake Michigan, I know a lot of them are loafing during the breeding season. I don't think it's helpful to them.
Hmm.
I think they're birds that have had trouble pairing up. If I had to give an estimate, I would say a good number of them probably are not breeding.
Hmm.
Gotcha. That's tough.
Poor fellows.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
oh, go ahead,
Go ahead,
Derek.
Ray.
Oh, well, thank you. I want to ask about one of the most mysterious varieties of gulls, and that's the high Arctic gulls, such as the ivory, the Rosses. They're notorious for when they come down here, they do not last long.
Yeah.
There's been some debate about exactly why that is. Do we know yet why they just can't survive in this environment?
I mean, those species, if we're talking about Ross's ivory, they're truly pelagic. Like ivory is meant to be on the pack ice. I mean, we have plankton and zooplankton on freshwater, but it's not the plankton and zooplankton they need. So the nutrients is one. Ross's similar thing. They don't do well on freshwater, and I don't think anybody's figured out exactly why, but we're sure that when they get down here, they almost immediately start to deteriorate. The evidence is from every 10 ivory gull sightings, probably 6 or 7 end up dying. And those are the ones that we just know about, right?
Yeah,
So I don't know if anyone knows why they have a hard time surviving, but the best explanation I've heard is that the plankton and zooplankton is not rich with the nutrients that they need.
interesting. I wonder if they ever find their way back. Obviously, if they get into the continental United States, that's a long way from where they belong. I mean, you kind of wonder that with any vagrant species, but those gulls, you wonder if they ever disappear because they moved back north, um, and why they came down here in the first place.
I like to think that gulls do make it back north, being the hardy and powerful flyers that they are. But if a bird is too weak, probably doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
That's kind of a weird feeling when a bird comes down here that you're really excited to see, or up here and you kind of know that it's doomed in a way. You know, you're like excited to see it, but you're also hoping it somehow finds a way back and that you don't end up hearing about it passing away. I went on a chase for Ross's gull. It was that one a few years ago that was right on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, if you
Yeah,
remember that one. Did you go see that one?
I didn't know.
Okay. Well, I tried and it was starting to look kind of bad the night before. And my friend and I got up there and we scoured the entire area was seen, didn't find it, found it sitting on a rock, deceased. So we got up there and found the bird passed away. We were the first ones to find it. And that was a weird feeling because we found the bird we were looking for, but we couldn't count it and it kind of had that morbidity to it.
Well, wasn't it weirder because people were taking pictures of it for a while,
Well, yeah,
thinking it was
everyone wanted it for
alive?
their list, so they wanted to count it. So they were just sitting there taking pictures of this dead bird, trying to say that they saw the eye twitch and it was still alive when they saw it originally and all this stuff, trying to debate if it could be counted or not. And then somebody called a rehabber that came and grabbed it and said it was very stiff, implying it had been dead for a while, probably over the night at some point. But that was a very strange experience.
That's so bizarre. I think that bird might be included in my book.
Really?
Hmm.
I want to say we did include it. Do you remember what age that bird was?
What age the
The first
bird
cycle?
was?
Was
No,
it
I
first cycle?
don't.
Oh, and the mold cycle.
Yeah, it wasn't an adult, right?
I
Was
don't believe so. No, it wasn't.
was this found by Benjamin Douglas?
I think so. It was right. I think Prescott was the name of the city it was in.
Yeah. Yeah. That bird is in the Ross's Gull species account.
There it is.
Oh, sorry. You're not going to be able to see it. You got to buy the book to see it.
Yeah,
Um, but it's actually plate number 2 in the Ross's Gull account. I remember that bird. You guys found it dead, huh?
We did, yeah. My friend Bill and I scoured the entire area.
is the
Um,
picture of it in the book alive or is it
No,
dead?
it's alive,
That's good.
I
100%.
That's
have a
good.
picture of it dead if you want it. If you're interested
Oh,
in doing
Second
another
edition.
edition. Yeah, second
no.
edition of it. I've got it.
We got the eye shine and everything. It's alive.
Well, give her a double check, I guess.
Do you
It
know
was
whatever happened to that specimen? Did it get mounted for like a museum or something? I would hope so.
the word on the street was that it was going to the university over there and they were going to preserve it. Or
Okay.
one of the universities in Minnesota, I think.
Yeah.
That's at least, something could come. Hopefully they did like an autopsy. Maybe they learned, something about the diet.
I don't know. I'm kind of torn because I really would love to see some of those Arctic gulls without going to the Arctic, but that
Yeah.
morbidity of it is kind of gives me pause,
Yeah,
which is
well,
part of
me
why I've never gone to chase any since then.
me and Nathaniel chased the Illinois. I believe we saw you there, Amar. The Illinois, Indiana Ross's Gull.
He's giving you a look like you saw him, but he did not see you.
Indiana, Illinois, Ross's Gull.
Yeah, by
Oh,
Steelworkers Park.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that the one at Rainbow?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Rainbow Beach. Yeah,
The one
yeah.
that was like 5 feet away from everybody.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
want to
that was
say
a good one.
March 25th, 2023.
Yep, that
I
sounds
love
right.
that recall.
Yeah.
Do you remember everything in your life like that, or literally just gull sightings?
Just those big ones, those big ones.
Does your wife get mad at you? You're like, you remember the date you saw the Ross's Gull, but
Well, I do a good job of not forgetting important dates in our life. So like I remember her birthday and all that. So
That's good.
yeah,
It's
I make
her
up for it.
birthday, the anniversary, the day the Ross's gull showed up.
all the
Um,
important stuff.
Hey, so let me put you to task for a second. Do you remember the black-tailed gull date from Waukegan?
do
Oh,
you,
the
Derek?
date? I don't remember the date. No.
Clearly, it didn't matter to you.
I remember the experience. I made an entire video about it, but I couldn't tell you the date.
Yeah, I
What
think
was
it
You
the
was
remember it,
date?
Amar?
it may have been May 30th or May 30th, I want to say. Yeah.
I was always gonna. It was May 30th at 12:03 p.m. I was wearing a plaid sweatshirt.
That was
I
a
know
good bird.
it
It was
was
a
a
good
great bird.
bird.
That
Yeah.
that was as good as it gets, really.
It was cool seeing the actual like black tail on it too. Yeah, that was a good
It's nice
bird.
when they're named for features that they actually prominently display, isn't it?
It's nice when they're with similar sized species for comparison. So like anyone who wanted to really learn black-tailed gull, you want to see it with ring-billed gulls. And
Mm,
you appreciate that difference in color, but similar size, difference in structure because they're longer wing, longer bill. So you really see that difference when you have them with ring bills. But then, these singleton rarities, you see them, but you don't really learn their structure and size because you're not comparing them to anything. So it's
yeah.
great when you have them with something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So gulls in general, I kind of in my mind separated as there's the hooded gulls and then there's the non-hooded gulls. I always feel as though hooded gull season is kind of more the spring and the summer, and non-hooded gull season is more the fall and the winter. Which of those two do you like more? Do you like it when the hooded gulls are coming up in the spring or when the gulls from the north are coming down in the fall and winter?
I prefer the larger gulls like Icelands and Glaucus and great blackbacks and lesser blackbacks. But the small gulls are good break, a good switch up. It's
Mhm.
needed, right? Because large gulls, 365 would be a little too much.
Too large.
Yeah. So no, it's nice to have that variety. I'm grateful to have the small gulls, but as far as studying gulls, I think the large gulls are more interesting just because of the variation that you find, the additional age groups, the more intricate molts.
Hmm. Yeah. And out of all of the gull species, which one would you say gives most people the biggest ID challenge?
Um, it's probably split between American herring and glaucus winged. In the West, it would be glaucus winged just because they hybridize with everything they come into contact with.
That's
So
true.
you're never really sure in the West if you have a pure glaucus wing. I mean, some are pretty obvious. I'm not going to say you're never really sure, but you're never really sure when birds have atypical features, if it's just a weird glaucus wing or a hybrid or a back cross. So there's always that in the West. But everywhere else, it's American herring gull. There's just so much variation. And I think we're just now starting to learn the different populations of American herring gull. So there's probably four good populations and probably two or three subspecies.
Is it usually confusion with American herring and then Iceland Thayer's type?
Um, like confusing herrings and Iceland types.
Yeah. Is it a herring or is it a Thayer's Iceland? Is that kind
Yeah,
of the big mix up?
I think that's if you're just getting into large gulls, that's a hurdle. And
Hmm.
that's one like once you get over that, you're on your way to large gull ID. Like I remember when I finally started finding Thayers, I thought, oh, okay, I'm getting this now. I see it. I get it. I see what the differences are. I think anyone who does that for themselves is definitely on their way. But what I'm talking about is a little more complicated. When you really start looking at American herring gulls, you start asking questions like, is it a Western American herring gull, an
Okay.
Arctic American herring gull? Is it possibly a European herring gull? That sort of thing.
I don't
I
think we're there, right?
no, no, no.
I
I was
don't think
gonna
I've once asked that question.
I want to get back to the herring gull thing because I think that's interesting because there sounds like there's going to be splits in the future with that. But I do want to go back to the Thayer's Iceland gull because when we started birding, Thayer's was its own species and it was a huge pain to try to pick out. And we eventually, I think, found one that was a dead ringer. You know, it had the dark on the outside and then the inner wing was all light. Well, the underside of the wing was all light. We were like, okay, cool. We finally found one and then it got lumped. But definitely not for me. But for our viewers, could you explain how to identify a Thayer's?
Yeah.
Again, not for me at all.
Their gray upper parts are on the Great Lakes, at least, they're almost identical to ring-billed herring color. The gray is a typical pale gull gray. Some, however, are going to be slightly darker than American herring. Not much, maybe a
Hmm.
shade, half a shade. Um, eye color is variable. So
Oh no,
yeah, up to 20% of Thayers, adult Thayers, can have pale eyes.
really? That was always an ID feature that people would say is look for the dark eye.
Yeah, so there's this band of about maybe 50% of them that have dark eyes.
Okay, wow.
And then there's a good percentage that have kind of light colored, honey brown eyes. But it's pretty rare to see them with eyes as pale as American herring, like pale yellow. That's pretty uncommon with theirs. Um, so eye color is nice. In the non-breeding season, from say December through February, they're gonna have this greenish cast to the bill.
Okay.
Besides generally averaging a smaller bill than American herring, they usually have this nice olive green cast to the bill. But the real important feature is the wingtip.
Hmm.
Um, if you're watching a bird perched, you'll notice a little more white on the outer edges of the primaries when they're perched, but also try to get a look at the underside of the far wing. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Like
Yep.
if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
look underside of the far wing, you should see a lot of white instead of a lot of black, like most Great Lakes American herring gulls.
Found this cool article called
Yeah.
the post Thayer's era. If you want to reference any of these pictures, I think this one's kind of showing that green you're talking about.
Yeah, that has a nice greenish cast to the bill. This one here, you'll notice the pigment on the outer primaries is kind of a slate color. It's not jet black.
Yeah.
So we have this neat thing on the Great Lakes, especially the Western Great Lakes, where we get intermediate type birds that in California, Washington, British Columbia would be called Thayers, and then out east on the Atlantic and up to Newfoundland, they'd be called, just darker Kumleen skulls.
Hmm.
So we see it with adults, we see it with first cycles like this bird. I mean, this is a pretty classic
That's a
Kumleen
nice
skull.
looking bird.
They're
Yeah,
one of the
nice bird.
prettiest gulls in my opinion.
It has kind of an atypical tail pattern for first cycle Kumleens, but it's definitely well within normal variation for Kumleens. This bird, this adult perched on the ice here is a typical adult Kumleens, all white tip to P10. The mirror on P9 goes from edge to edge. This is a bird that was in Hammond, Indiana for about 7 winters. So
Wow.
we got to study this bird really well, got to know like how its head pattern was going to change month by month. And it did a strange thing. It was very protective of the marina. It wouldn't let other gulls in this little harbor, the Hammond Marina.
Hmm.
It dominated this harbor, and any gull that like crossed the break wall and came to the docks, it would chase off. And it's the first time I've ever seen a northern Arctic gull hold a winter territory. It's very
Yeah.
strange. And then I inquired and asked people about this, and some people have seen a similar thing with glaucous gulls out in like Maine. They just hold this like little territory, a beachfront where they chase birds off. Very strange behavior. But this here at the bottom of the post is a dark Thayer's. This one might be confused with a herring gull. There's so much black in the wingtip.
Yeah.
Um, but I can tell it has a dark eye. I can tell it has a greenish cast to the bill. And then the head pattern there, the markings on the head look kind of smudgy.
Hmm.
On herring gull, they typically look more streaked, more fine than this like blotted, smudged pattern.
Interesting.
That sounds like classic gull ID. Look at how it's smudged compared to
Yeah.
streaked.
Oh yeah, yeah. The head patterns are definitely helpful. Like lesser blackback is fine streaking. Um, Great blackback almost never shows a lot of head markings.
So with, something like this bird, are we pretty confident to say that it's like a pure Iceland gull? Or is there a chance that many of the gulls we see that we consider quote unquote pure have some amount of other species genetic information?
So with the Iceland gulls, there is zero records, no data to suggest they hybridize with anything else.
That's a
Okay.
relief.
Yeah, and I read about this. I have some commentary on the Iceland Gull complex in the book. They get a little extra attention than the other complexes, but there's no data that has ever been suggested from anyone that the Iceland gulls hybridize, and that's unusual for gulls of the northern Arctic region. Slatyback is known to hybridize, glaucus wing, herring, the blackbacks. Um, but the only large gulls of the north where there's no records of hybridizing are the Iceland gulls, which is
That's
interesting.
interesting. I like that for them.
Yeah, or special group.
So for beginners who see the Gull complex and they're just like, this is too confusing. I don't know where to start. I don't know what I'm doing. What would be your top tips for beginner Gull identification?
Um, if you really want to do it right and not just get by, my suggestion would be do it right. Don't be afraid to learn feather tracks. Don't be afraid to learn molt terminology, plumage terminology. And probably the best way to do it with gulls is to learn Humphrey Park's terminology. And basically, Humphrey Park's uses a very neat system where it associates a plumage with the molt that brought about that plumage. So if you're looking at a bird wearing a certain plumage, the question to ask is, what was the molt event that produced that plumage? And so every plumage has a one-to-one relation with the molt that produced it. So for example, you might call a Bonaparte's gull with a black hood breeding plumage, right? Humphrey Parks avoids using breeding, non-breeding terminology because it's useless when it comes to some groups of birds, mainly gulls, because you have a first-year bird, second-year bird, third-year bird, perhaps not breeding. So it doesn't make any sense to use that terminology. So what we say is alternate plumage, which a lot of people would just call breeding plumage, and the molt that brings about alternate plumage is the pre-alternate molt. Molts usually have this prefix pre. Pre-basic molt produces basic plumage. Pre-formative molt produces formative plumage. So if I'm looking at a ring-billed gull, say a second-year ring-billed gull, it could look different in June than it does in December. So if I know that ahead of time, this second-year ring-billed gull is going to take on two different plumages this year, I'll be ready for what it's going to look like in June versus December. So my advice would be if you're reluctant to approach gulls because you think they're too difficult, they're going to be extra difficult if you try to do it without really learning plumages and molt. So I've seen friends like try to learn gulls half-heartedly, and it's not a group of birds where you can do half-heartedly. Like if you wanted to get in gulls and really understand what you're looking at, um, don't shy away from the terminology, from the nomenclature.
So just
Yeah.
dive right in. You can't do it halfway.
Yeah, and then a lot of people don't want to hear that. They want a gulls for dummies. Like, just show me how to do this in a 2-hour workshop. And it's unfortunately it's not that group of birds where you can. I don't
Well,
know.
thankfully, there's going to be a whole book that people can now thumb through and, deep dive into the gulls.
Yes, 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 definitely, definitely. I mean, the introduction is 60 pages of explaining these things. Like you got to read 60 pages before you get into the first species account. The first species account is Sabin's gull, and the last species account is Iceland gull. But the intro, 60 pages that talks about feather parts, the names of feathers, aging, molt, variation, identification tips. I have a couple of neat sections that talk about the aberrations that we find in gulls. Gulls being so ubiquitous and out in the open, we tend to notice the aberrations on them more than other groups of birds. Like, why does this one have this extra pink? Or why does this one have this dark eye and a pale eye? So I have a whole section that shows about 20 plates of different aberrations that we've come to expect in gulls. Then I have another section titled similar comparative sizes. So I'll have like a parasitic Jaeger with a laughing gull, or an ivory gull with Arctic tern. And they're birds that were actually photographed in the field. They're not montages or anything. They're like real photos of birds in the field, a Kumlin's gull with a northern fulmar or something. So that I think is very helpful to see, common and rare birds together and just kind of get a feel for the size comparison, structure comparison.
Do you have a lot of direct comparison in the book, like great blackback versus lesser blackback? Here's how you tell them.
Yeah.
Glaucus versus Iceland. Here's how you tell them.
One of the things that took so long to put this book together was picking those perfect photos.
Hmm.
So everywhere you would want those kind of photos, like show me a great blackback and a lesser blackback, show me a Thayer's and a herring, show me a Bonaparte's and a little gull. Um, that's all in there. Those direct comparisons are available everywhere you would want them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like when we started, it was like, because we didn't really know what we were doing when we first started. So we're like, well,
True.
we just need to find one Iceland gull, and then we don't have to look for it again the entire year.
Yep.
Just one and done. So we'd go to the lakefront and try to scan through and find like the most obvious candidate of like glaucus gull and stuff like that. And we were able to do that and get those, but it did take a while to kind of get better. And I don't think we're, gull experts by any means, but like I feel like there's so much to learn with it. Like when you think you're starting to get it, then it's like, well, let's try the younger birds that all kind of look, the juvenile herring versus great blackback gull or things like that that just make it more complicated.
Well, I mean, we live in a great place on the Great Lakes. There's so much variety. You go to Sheboygan, Manitowoc in the spring, you can see the little gulls, the small gulls. I don't want to say little gulls. L, lowercase L.
You can
Um,
see the uppercase little gulls this year, though.
yeah, and
Derek has lifer
I
this year
did,
in
yeah.
little
Sheboygan,
gull,
I think.
really
Yeah.
Yeah.
awesome, awesome. Um, I think Manitowoc. I want to say 2017. I had 11 little gulls, and that's the most I've ever seen in North America.
Wow.
So yeah, there's really no better place than the Great Lakes to see them.
The
Yeah.
little gulls breed somewhere in the Great Lakes, don't they? Like on this side? I thought there were records of them breeding in the state.
So like historically, that's where they were found. They were found in Manitowoc. They were found outside of Toronto. But they haven't bred like this far south in years.
Gotcha.
The closest place now is probably the Hudson Lowlands.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So aside from kind of doing the deep dive, is there a certain species that you think is easier than the other ones? Like, should people try to start with parking lot gulls, like your ringbills and your herring gulls? Should they, try to go where there's a bunch of different species? What do you recommend? Should they take a vacation somewhere far away just for gulls?
You know, I gave a Gull ID talk on Sunday at the Urban Birding Festival, and I closed with go to your closest parking lot, wherever you have your flocks of common gulls, whether they be ring-billed gull or herring gull or Western gulls or California gulls, start with them. Start with the species you're going to see 90% of the time. And just, whether it be a Burger King parking lot or a beachfront,
KFC.
KFC, and commit yourself to, all right, these are ring builds, so I expect 3 age groups. And I'm just going to spend like half an hour identifying every individual and aging every individual and just see how far along it is in its molt. What plumage is it wearing? Try to put a name on that plumage. But there's this tendency, especially with beginning birders, and I completely get it. There's this tendency to avoid common birds. Like I've seen common yellowthroat and just keep walking, right? But when you do that with gulls, you're missing an opportunity to learn variation, and that variation is so visible in things like herring gulls and ring-billed gulls. Um, as you expose yourself to those common species, you start to build a reference, a frame of reference for when I do see this rare black-tailed gull, or I do see this slaty-back gull, how different does it look than my herring gull or than my ring-billed gull? And what are the identifying features that I'm going to be able to point out right away? But if you never give yourself a chance to study the common species, finding rarities, like I don't have to tell you guys, becomes increasingly difficult.
Yeah, and I do think over time, like I remember this summer scanning through a flock of gulls trying to find a couple Franklins that were mixed in. You almost get excited about it, where at first I feel like it was overwhelming. It's like you look at it, you set up your scope, there's all these birds out there, you're like, how am I going to find these? But at a certain point, when you know you can do it, you're like, I'm pumped to look through these gulls and, pick out the two that are slightly different. I definitely felt a shift at some point in that. And I feel like if people study it enough, they'll feel that same kind of shift.
Well, we'll take like first cycle lesser blackback gulls, right? Um, there are reports in Sheboygan of this past summer, 3 or 4 people. I was looking through their eBird lists, and I was amazed because a friend and I went out. Greg Neese, you guys might know Greg.
No
We
of
went
them, yeah.
out
No of
one
it, man.
day in June, and we had like upper 80s, I think
Oh yeah.
85, 87 lesser blackback gulls.
They were everywhere there. You could not look at any group of gulls and not see a couple of them sprinkled in.
Yeah. But there's people who've been birding for decades who are just writing them off as herring gulls. And the reason for that is they haven't really ever looked at herring gulls. Like they're all throughout the lakefront, but yet they're being called herring gulls. So what that says is people are not taking the time to learn herring gulls. Like they just don't know the variation found in herring gulls. If they did, they would identify a lot more lesser blackback gulls. And
Mhm.
boy, there are a lot of lesser blackback gulls summering on Lake Michigan.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, you know, knowing them in an adult plumage is one thing, or um, whatever technical term you would want to say for that plumage. But knowing them in the cycles and plumages before that, I think is very daunting because there is such a variety. You know, you look at a herring gull when it's a full-on adult and it's going to look drastically different than that dark mocha gull that you'll see earlier on in its life. And then when you look at that versus a lesser blackback when it's earlier on in its life, people just haven't dug into that at all. You know, they can identify the full on right in front of you adult version, but everything before that has not been studied to them often, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an underreported age group for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of times for probably until the past couple of years, when I would see a group like that, I would kind of discount all the ones that were more mocha chocolatey colored because I would just say, I don't know. I am not sure. This is above my pay grade.
I
So
do
I
feel like
totally understand.
normally it's like it's probably a herring gull too, unless you're on the Sheboygan lakefront there. But
Kind of looking at those gulls, especially this year, a lot of the lesser blackback. I remember because there was hundreds and hundreds of gulls there, and you were trying to pick through them to find little gulls, and there was a couple of laughing gulls and Franklin's gulls, and I was looking
that
at.
was a great spot.
Oh
Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was looking at them, and I would say that one looks an awful lot like a lesser blackback, and I'd look 2 gulls over. That one looks an awful lot like a lesser blackback. I was like, could there literally be this many lesser blackbacks? And I just haven't noticed this before until now when I'm looking for them. So I totally agree with your assessment.
yes, yes, yes. There's places on the Atlantic, Virginia of all places, where there's more lesser blackbacks than anything else. There's 300 lesser blackback gulls on the shore, more than herring gulls. And people are just now getting on to them. They're learning these first cycle and second cycle lesser blackbacks. It's great.
What do you
Yeah,
think
they're cool
the
looking bird too.
biggest Yeah.
definitely.
What do you think the biggest misconception about gulls is?
Um, there's a lot. There's a few. There's a few at least if you're talking
Let's
about the
let's set
birding
the record
community,
straight right now. Yeah.
in the birding community or in general.
Both.
So in the birding community, um, they're definitely underdogs in the avian world. Um, I think they almost are last on people's lists of priorities when it comes to birds. And maybe not so much because they don't have great voices or a variety of colors. Um,
It's the dumb
there's
thing, isn't it?
there's something threatening, I think, to have a species that's such a generalist that it could do everything. It could eat everything we can eat and survive right outside our doorstep. There's something threatening about it, and I don't know the psychology behind it, but add to it identification complexities, and it's like a perfect recipe for a bird you want to hate. Like this scavenger that gives me ID problems. Um,
Makes
write
me
it
go to the
off.
dump.
Yeah, it makes goes and feeds in the landfill. So yeah, they're definitely underdogs in the birding world. I can't think of other groups of birds that are beneath them. Probably blackbirds
Pigeons.
are not a
Yeah,
part of it.
pigeons, like
Pigeons.
house sparrows, maybe
I think
starlings.
people kind of
Not
lump
really
them all
groups of birds
together. I
though.
think it's you could put the broad umbrella of birds that get close to people. You know, birds, they're deemed not wild anymore. They're parking lot birds. They live with us.
Urban
They're
birds, yeah.
they're too close to what we are, Amar. That's
Yeah,
what it is. It's our own
absolutely.
self-hatred, and we
You
see
got it.
ourselves in the gulls.
You got it. Exactly. But then it's interesting because then within this same group of birds, you have some of the most coveted birds in the world, Ross's gull, Sabin's gull. It's if it wasn't for the small gulls, we'd be in trouble.
I do love a great blackback gull, though. Those things are incredible when you see them. They're
Although our
monstrous.
first couple years of birding, we saw a great blackback gull. Yeah, it was like a little pool of water on Lake Michigan, like ice all around it. We saw it go grab a common goldeneye, break its wing, and
Ooh,
start like trying to eat it, just
oh,
like in front of us. It was pretty gruesome.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
man, it's interesting. Where did you see that? Because I saw a similar thing in Racine.
That was on the Milwaukee lakefront, I believe.
Yep. We also, there's actually this really awesome picture our friend took. We were in Oregon and we were on the coast, and it was one of those hybrid glaucous wing gulls. It grabbed a black turnstone by the wing, and there's this picture of it just holding on to this black turnstone, and eventually it let it go. But it was just a reminder that they will try to take down anything that they can.
Definitely. Definitely. That's one of the awesome thing about gulls is you can have a gull feeding in an ag field one morning, and then by afternoon, it's in the Burger King parking lot. Midday, it's at a landfill, and then maybe it ends its day, I don't know, on the lake somewhere.
Sounds like what we do.
Yeah.
What's your least favorite gull?
Ho, ho, ho.
Yeah.
Funny.
They're gonna show up outside your outside your window after this is done.
Um, think I really have a least favorite gull. I'm not too
Ooh, cop
crazy about
out.
Western gulls.
Okay.
I've never been crazy about Western gulls. When I go out west, I just kind of it's a Western gull, but they're neat birds. I mean, they're very fascinating birds. A lot of the beginning studies on gulls in North America were done on Western gulls.
Hmm.
And the revised Humphrey Parks molt system that we now have that Steve Howell and Peter Pyle put together was done from studying Western gulls. But I don't find Western gulls very intriguing, let's say.
How about this? We'll play a really, really quick game. On a 1 to 10 scale, 1 is the worst, 10 is the best. I'm going to say gull species, and you tell me where it ranks in your opinion, okay?
Yes.
You ready?
Let's do it.
Kierman's Gull.
7.
Great Blackback Gull.
5.
Ivory Gull.
8.
Western Gull.
1.
Iceland Gull.
7.5.
And Sabin's Gull.
8.5.
And there you have
Ross's
it,
Gull.
folks.
Ross's Gull 9, maybe.
What's a 10? Swallowtail Gull?
Maybe Franklin's.
Oh, the
Okay. Wow.
Franklins.
Franklin's really is the underdog here, I feel like.
Yeah,
Franklins are
Franklin's
cool
is
though. They have such nice big eye crescents.
They're very dove-like. That's kind of what I like about them.
Yeah, they're
very
kind of dainty.
very
They're a
Yeah.
cool
dove.
bird.
If you've seen them, like I said, if you go to Red Rock in Iowa, they have these really interesting staging behaviors. They roost on these large man-made reservoirs at night, and then they get up at sunrise and they go out to the fields and they just follow the plow, and they're up in the sky hawking insects for half the day, and then they come back to these man-made lakes, and then one minute they decide to all get up and just move to the next move to the next state. And they just do this in mass, like thousands of them move throughout the interior, from October through early November. And then by December, they're now going through a complete molt in Peru, feeding in the Humboldt Current. So it's a neat bird to follow. If you're going to follow a gull from January to December, Franklin's is one of them.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
One last thing I want to talk about is we met up to look for the Colonel, the laughing ring-billed gull hybrid that hangs out on the Illinois-Indiana border, and was quite an experience going down there and looking for that really cool looking bird. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about the Colonel?
Yeah, so at least where we think the kernel originates from, around 2001, they found a pure laughing gull breeding in the southeast side of Chicago in a ring-billed gull colony. Um, First state record of laughing gull nesting in the state, but it wasn't nesting with another laughing gull. It was paired up with a ring-billed gull. Next breeding season, people found the first year weird looking laughing ring-billed gull. And like right away, folks in that region started to suspect it was a hybrid. And they started putting two and two together. And they found it in a KFC parking lot on the Illinois-Indiana state line. And from then until now, 20 years later, that bird has been in that region every year, comes back around mid-March, sticks around until October-ish, depending on conditions. They will move if it gets too cold, and they will stay if it's warm up until I've had them in early November. But typically they're out of here by early October. Our ring-billed gulls on southern Lake Michigan move inland. They move to reservoirs in like central Illinois, Kentucky, and they just keep moving south as needed. And then they're replaced with ring-billed gulls from farther north. We start getting newer groups, the hardier ones. So the kernel leaves. The kernel leaves in early fall. And there's been photos of what we think is the kernel in Kentucky and
Huh?
Tennessee.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Kentucky.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Back to
But
where it all started.
back to, yeah, going back to its roots.
Signature herbs and spices.
Yeah.
Oh, I've seen the kernel every year, I think, since 2009, maybe 2010. So it's been back for about 20 years now. Um, it seems to be a Great Lakes thing, this ring-billed laughing hybrid thing. Um, they're seen in Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and not so much the eastern Great Lakes, mainly the western Great Lakes.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I have to say, the one thing I really took away from the experience that shocked me was how incredibly good you are at throwing bread.
Uh-huh.
Because the sheer distance and the sheer spin that each slice had as it careened hundreds of yards offshore was incredible.
Yeah, I practice a lot, and just knowing where the wind is coming from, and angling and positioning yourself in the right place. Um, you also have to have, bread that's either really hard that you can frisbee, or fresh bread that's going to not flop around and break into pieces.
Yeah, I think my bread I used was too delicate.
I don't know.
I think that's what it
I
probably
think it might have
was
been
more
some
than anything
user
else.
error there.
But I
I
do
don't
think
know.
that if there were a birder Olympics, you would probably have to enter the bread throw discus, and I think would do quite well.
I think I would. I think I'd do okay. So on this pelagic that we were on Saturday, we had a variety of things. We had fish parts, and the gulls loved it. We had cat food. They absolutely hated it. They didn't
Huh.
do anything with the cat food,
That's
dry cat
surprising.
food. I mean,
Oh,
it's
okay.
on the water surface, and they weren't even doing anything with it. Popcorn, same thing, which is strange because they usually go for the popcorn. It was fish parts and bread. That's all they were interested in this Saturday.
Hmm.
Weird.
Yeah.
That reminds me of something I actually wanted you to just talk about briefly, the Gull Frolic, a very interesting event that takes place in Illinois. Um, I was actually planning to go to it once. I talked with the people that were helping to run it, and I was all set, and my car broke down on the way there, so I've not been able to experience the Gull Frolic. But
Oh
would
man.
you would you tell everybody a little bit about what it is and what it's like?
Yeah, so the Gulf Frolic is hosted by the Illinois Ornithological Society. It's an annual event. Takes place in mid-February. We rent a yacht club right on the Illinois-Wisconsin state line on Lake Michigan. And the yacht club can hold 150, 175 people, usually fills up and sells out within a few weeks. We have a guest speaker, we have food all day. It's a really nice annual event where birders get together and gull watch on Lake Michigan. So we'll sit right on the shore there and chum. And we get gulls that come in from probably as far as Waukegan, as far as Racine, Kenosha. Because we'll start the day sometimes with just a couple dozen gulls, and by sundown we'll have a couple thousand gulls.
It's
So they
crazy.
come in, they come in from the local landfills. There's two or three landfills in the area. But this is now, I think it's going to be the 23rd annual Gull Frolic. It started with a couple birders birding at the yacht club, freezing cold, asked the folks at the yacht club if they can use their restroom. Went inside, they warmed up for a few minutes, and then they're like, "How much would you guys charge us if we just used your hallway to bird watch?" And so it all started from there, and now it's just this big popular event that sells out every year.
I'm a big fan of the lore, and I think we'll have to go do it one of these years for sure.
Oh, come on down, mark your calendar. It's going to be on a Sunday this year. This is the first year we've tried a Sunday. It's
Uh,
going to be February 16th, a Sunday, and it was my idea to do it on a Sunday. Saturday, the landfills are open till about noon. And so a lot of the gulls will stay in the landfill, and it doesn't really get good until after lunch. When the landfill closes, the gulls come back to the lake because they roost off the lake. But this year, we're just going to hit it hard from the morning on a Sunday and hope the gulls come right back to us.
you gonna get us in there? Give us a free pass, free media pass?
I know a guy. I know
Okay. All
a guy.
right. All right.
It's such a
Definitely.
classic thing to have a gull event be structured around when the landfills are open or not. Like that is just such a classic detail, you know, like we're basing the event off the landfill schedule.
Oh, it's like clockwork. Back in 2014, February 14th, Valentine's Day, I found a slaty back gull at the
Ooh,
Lake County Fairgrounds. It was feeding at a landfill. It was a Friday, first county record. And the next day was a gull frolic 15 miles away. That bird came in the last hour of the day.
wow.
So
It's
it
a good
spent its
find.
whole day at the landfill on a Saturday, came to us at the end of the day, 15 miles away.
That's
And-
crazy.
yeah, and there's multiple records of that. Like people see these birds inland, and then at the end of the day, they come to the lakefront.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You know, with most of those hanging out at the landfill and seemingly being pretty abundant, how worried are we about gulls from a conservation standpoint?
Um, I think overall the numbers for our northern gulls seem to be okay. Herring gulls, great blackbacks, slatybacks, glaucous wings. Um, the problem is there's not a concerted effort to really survey these numbers. What'll happen, here's what we have a lot of data of. Glaucous wing colony relocating. Too many bald eagles in this region. A landfill closes down, so the entire glaucous wing colony disappears, like within a 6 month period. So there's data on that that shows if you remove one of the food sources, they will relocate. They will like up and go and reposition somewhere else. There's a lot of that data, but there isn't long-term data showing sharp declines of any of our large gulls. It's much more they're not here anymore, but now there's more of them here. That
Uh-huh.
kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they
Yeah.
just seem like they're not necessarily disappearing, they're popping up other places.
Yeah.
So they're not necessarily concerning as a comfort or a conservation standpoint, but interesting habits.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the laughing gull that I referred to that was found in a ring-billed colony in southeast Chicago, that colony was wiped clean by the city of Chicago. They went in, they oiled all the eggs, they
Wow.
decimated that colony, 60,000 breeding birds,
Wow.
Jeez.
longer there. But then within a couple years, all these little colonies started popping up on rooftops at these, manufacturers and parking lots, little islands. So they just relocated is what they did.
Why'd the
They're just a
city go through
hardy
and do that?
type.
There was never a really good reason, but their primary reason they said was they were contributing to the E. coli levels in the water on the lakefront at the beaches,
Hmm.
which is really strange because the E. coli levels fluctuate. It depends on the temperatures and it just depends on a number of conditions. Um, but that was their rationales that if we get rid of the gulls, the E. coli levels will go down.
Sounds kind of half-baked.
Yeah, it does.
Definitely, definitely. So we're not sure. We're not really sure what's happened with those E. coli levels. There's just less reporting of it these days.
Convenient.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right, well, thanks so much, Amar. Where can people learn more about gulls? Like the Facebook page, North American Gulls, right? And
Yeah.
then your blog.
Yeah, if you're into like a monthly quiz I put on my blog, where there's an emphasis on molt and aging. Um, Also, there's this great book coming out called The Gull Guide. Um, Pick it up, please, if you're interested in gulls, ready to take on gulls, or just need another reference with 1,800 plus photos. Lots of diagrams, lots of figures. That's going to be the book. That's going to be the book, I hope.
Where can people get it? Amazon?
Yeah,
Is there
Amazon,
a best place for you?
Princeton University Press website or Amazon, whatever works better for folks, whatever they think is cheaper or faster. But they're the same price right now on both Amazon and the Princeton University website. Uh, some folks have been emailing me to get an autographed copy that I'm going to personally mail out to people. So reach out to me if you'd like. I'd be happy to send you one by snail mail.
I was gonna ask, is there gonna be a formal book signing at any time?
Yeah, there's a few that are going to take place. Locally in Illinois, I have one with the DuPage Birding Club, November 14th. But before that, the week before that, I'll be at Rio Grande
Oh,
Birding
very
Festival.
nice.
I'll be signing books there. I'll be kind of all over the place. I'll be in Philadelphia in mid-December, the Space Coast Festival in January for folks going to be out there. The Gull Frolic in mid-February. Hope to see you two there. So there'd be plenty of opportunities to sign books and get one from me.
feel like
Sounds like it's got a
you
red
gotta do
carpet
one.
rollout.
You gotta do one at a landfill. Bunch of gulls in the background, signing
Oh, yeah,
books.
that'd be amazing. I'm actually the closest thing to that will be in Philadelphia. I got a talk on Friday night at the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences. And then the next morning, we're doing a CBC in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, in a landfill.
Very
It's,
nice.
yeah.
I thought you just meant the city of Philadelphia, and I was like, that's a hot take.
Well, the
Like the
whole thing,
closest thing to in a landfill, we're going to Philadelphia.
the whole thing's a dump.
Oh, geez. All right. Well, thanks so much, Amar, and thanks to everyone for watching this episode of the Badgerland Birding Podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.